This employee was traveling to another country to deliver a very large parcel. But while crossing an unknown region of the ocean, their plane crashed. It was the kind of place from which no one had ever returned alive. This is where the adventurous story begins, introducing us to Chuck, an employee who worked as a manager at FedEx. FedEx was the leading import-export company of that time, known for delivering parcels and goods to people's homes across the globe. Chuck often stayed in the factory, motivating his team by reminding them that they had to deliver packages before the promised time. According to him, this built even more trust with their customers. Inspired by his passion, the employees no longer treated their work as just a job but as a personal milestone. However, Chuck's intense dedication to his work wasn't always appreciated by everyone. Still, to help the company grow, work had to be done, and that was Chuck's role, traveling to different countries, inspecting FedEx branches, and encouraging the staff. We learn that Chuck had a girlfriend named Kelly. The two loved each other deeply and wanted to get married, but Chuck's demanding job left him with no time to settle down. That's why they hadn't married yet, believing the timing wasn't right. Although their love was strong, Chuck's career kept getting in the way. One day, Chuck told Kelly that he had to take a very important consignment to another country. Unfortunately, this happened during Christmas, a time when Kelly had imagined celebrating the festival with him. But instead, Chuck was preparing to leave again for work. To reassure her, Chuck promised this would be the last time. After this trip, he would leave his high-pressure job behind. Kelly was overjoyed, and she helped him get ready for the journey. They exchanged Christmas gifts, and when Chuck opened his, he found a pendant with a small clock on it, along with their cherished photos. Soon after, Chuck boarded a private plane carrying the entire consignment, accompanied by only a few crew members. Their goal was to deliver everything on time, so they pressed forward quickly, unaware of the danger ahead. As the plane crossed over the Pacific Ocean, it suddenly developed technical problems. The pilots struggled to control it, and it seemed as though some unknown force in the ocean was pulling at the systems, dragging them down. The crew had no idea what to do. The aircraft plunged rapidly toward the water and crashed. Luckily, Chuck jumped out before impact, but the plane was completely destroyed, killing everyone else on board. He was the only survivor, left stunned and terrified in the middle of the vast ocean. Overwhelmed and confused, Chuck didn't know what to do. The rough waters dragged him under, and he lost consciousness. Fortunately, he ended up floating onto a lifeboat that carried him forward through the night. By morning, Chuck realized he had reached a deserted island. He had no idea of its location or direction. Frightened, he stepped out and began exploring the surroundings. To his dismay, there were no humans, no animals, nothing living at all on the island. Chuck quickly realized that he was trapped on this island. To get out, he would need to signal a rescue team. When no help arrived for hours, he decided to write the word "help" in huge letters across the sand. His hope was that if a rescue plane ever flew over, the crew would spot the letters and know someone was stranded there. That night, too terrified to explore the forest, unsure what kinds of animals might lurk inside, he stayed in his lifeboat and tried to sleep, waiting anxiously in the dark. By morning, when Chuck returned to check on his symbol, he discovered the tide had washed it away. Writing in sand was useless. Determined, he gathered large wooden logs and arranged them into the word "help," hoping this stronger signal might eventually save him. Even though he held on to hope, he had no idea how critical the coming days would be. While searching along the shore, Chuck came across several FedEx parcels scattered across the beach, wreckage from the crashed plane. He collected them all, but none contained food or water. By now, an entire day had passed, and he hadn't eaten or drunk anything. Suddenly, he heard a strange sound. Startled, he spun around, trying to locate the source. Was some unknown animal watching him? But then, a coconut dropped from above. Relieved, he realized the sound had come from the falling fruit. Chuck grew excited because coconuts meant he could finally quench his thirst. But there was a problem: he had no tool to crack one open. He slammed the coconut repeatedly against rocks, but its hard shell didn't break. The outer husk was thick and fibrous, usually requiring a sharp blade. Without one, the task seemed impossible. By smashing the coconut against rocks again and again, Chuck finally managed to crack it open. Water poured out, and he quickly drank it before eating the soft flesh inside. This gave him strength and hope. If he had coconuts, he could survive for many days. After countless attempts, he finally succeeded, quenching his thirst. Yet, the fear lingered. No one had come to rescue him. Days began to pass in this same way. Chuck tried to catch fish in the ocean to fill his stomach, but the sharp rocks beneath the water injured his feet. Tearing strips of cloth, he wrapped them around the wounds and pressed on. He climbed up a rocky cliff to get a better view of his surroundings. From the top, he spotted something floating in the water. Rushing down to it, he turned it over and was horrified to discover the dead body of his pilot, who had perished in the crash. Seeing this broke his spirit, but he knew that if he wanted to live, he had no choice but to keep surviving. Chuck began relying entirely on the island's natural resources. He drank coconut water, collected rainwater from plants, and attempted to catch fish from the ocean, though so far, he hadn't succeeded in catching even one. A full week passed this way. During that time, he gave the dead pilot a proper burial, taking his shoes and flashlight, which he hoped would be useful later. One night, while standing on the shore, Chuck spotted a distant ship moving across the dark ocean. Its bright lights flashed against the waves, and with renewed hope, Chuck desperately turned his flashlight on and off, trying to signal them. But the ship was far too distant, and his small beam of light went unnoticed. The ship sailed away, leaving Chuck devastated. Crushed by disappointment, he decided to take a risk. At dawn, he climbed into his lifeboat and paddled into the open sea, hoping he could reach a passing vessel. But as he pushed further out, enormous waves rose before him. The towering walls of water capsized his boat, slamming him into the rocks. His legs were badly injured, leaving him in agonizing pain. Unable to continue, he dragged himself back to shore. Searching for shelter, Chuck stumbled upon a cave, where he collapsed from exhaustion and pain. That night it rained heavily, and his flashlight battery finally died. By morning, weak and desperate, he returned to the beach. He opened the FedEx parcels he had collected earlier, praying for something useful. Most contained worthless items, except for a volleyball and a pair of ice skates. Clearly, he couldn't skate on this island, but then, he had an idea. Chuck broke off the sharp metal blade of the skate and used it as a makeshift tool to open coconuts. It worked perfectly, faster and more efficient than smashing them on rocks. For the first time, he felt a small sense of control over his survival. Using the blades from the ice skates, Chuck fashioned several sharp tools that allowed him to spear fish in the shallow waters. After many days of hunger, he finally managed to catch a few small fish. He even caught some crabs, but he knew he couldn't eat them raw, they had to be cooked. For that, he needed fire, something he had no real knowledge about. Chuck had only heard that rubbing sticks together could create fire, so he tried it himself. In practice, it was far more difficult than he imagined. Despite countless attempts, nothing worked. In a real survival situation like this, the most effective method is the bow and drill technique. For this, you take a flat piece of wood, place a dry stick vertically on top of it, and tie the stick to a bow so it can move back and forth quickly. By rolling the stick with the bow across the flat wood, friction builds up, producing heat until an ember forms. Unlike twisting by hand, the bow saves energy and generates enough friction to spark a flame. After exhausting effort, Chuck finally succeeded. He managed to create fire and cook his food. Now, with roasted crabs and cooked fish, his body received much-needed nutrition. Among the FedEx parcels, he had also found a volleyball. Lonely and starved for human interaction, he drew a face on it and named it Wilson. Over time, the ball became his only friend. The crushing isolation had begun to affect his mind, and he found comfort in talking to Wilson, sharing his thoughts as though the ball were alive. But one problem tormented him more than hunger or loneliness: his rotting tooth. A dentist had once told him to have it removed, but he never did, and now the pain was unbearable. Determined to end his suffering, Chuck placed the blade of the ice skate against his tooth, propped it in position, and struck it with a stone. With one brutal hit, several of his teeth shattered. The pain was excruciating, but at last, the infection was gone. Time passed. The story leapt forward 4 long years. By now, Chuck's appearance had completely changed. Wild, uncut hair and a thick beard gave him the look of a primitive tribesman. He had mastered survival on the island, catching fish with ease, cooking meals, and skillfully using natural resources. Yet he knew he couldn't live there forever. One day, while searching near the water, Chuck noticed something unusual drifting toward shore: a piece of steel. Studying it, he got an idea. His inflatable lifeboat was still intact, but he could never get past the giant waves surrounding the island. Perhaps, if he used this steel fragment as a protective shield against the surf, he could finally break through. Wasting no time, Chuck began collecting large logs, determined to build a sturdy raft. Chuck knew the risk he was taking was dangerous, but he had no other choice. After hours of exhausting work, he used the inflatable lifeboat and wooden logs to construct a raft. He fixed the steel panel to its front, hoping it would slice through the crashing waves. Without delay, he pushed the raft into the water, grabbed the paddles he had made, and began rowing with all his strength. The ocean waves towered before him, slamming down onto his raft again and again. Each surge threatened to destroy everything, but the steel shield actually worked, helping him break through the surf. After years stranded on the island, this was the first time he had managed to get so far away from it. But now he faced the endless, unforgiving ocean, filled with countless dangers that could easily take his life. Still, Chuck pressed on, hour after hour. He had prepared carefully, bringing along coconuts for water, fish he had caught, and even containers of collected rainwater. But storms are inevitable at sea, and soon a violent one struck, tearing away the steel panel that had kept him safe. Exhausted, Chuck collapsed on the raft and fell asleep. During the night, tragedy struck again. His only companion, Wilson the volleyball, drifted away into the dark waters. When morning came, Chuck realized Wilson was gone. Heartbroken, he tried to swim after it, but it was too far. He returned to the raft in despair, crying uncontrollably. Wilson had been his only friend during all those lonely years, someone he could talk to, laugh with, and share his days. Losing the ball felt like losing a real person, and now, in the middle of the ocean, he wept for his imaginary friend. Days passed as Chuck drifted across the open sea. Weak, frail, and nearly broken, he no longer had the strength he once did. And then, something unexpected appeared on the horizon. Not a creature, but a massive cruise ship. Miraculously, the crew spotted him and pulled him aboard. Chuck was rescued at last. After receiving medical treatment, he was flown back to his city. But home was no longer the same. Everyone had believed Chuck died in the plane crash years ago. They had even held his funeral and moved on with their lives. His girlfriend Kelly had married someone else and now had a child. When Chuck finally saw her, she was overjoyed to find him alive, but gently told him the truth: she had a family now, and their paths had diverged forever. The truth broke Chuck's heart. Yet, he understood, this was reality, and he had no choice but to accept it. Kelly could never abandon her family and return to Chuck. With a heavy heart, Chuck said goodbye, handing her the locket that had stayed with him through all those desperate, lonely days on the island. Kelly accepted it with tears in her eyes. As they walked outside, she apologized again, saying she wished things could be different. But in that final moment, she couldn't resist. Kelly leaned forward and kissed Chuck, a kiss filled with all the love they once had and everything they had lost. Deep down, she had always loved him. Life's circumstances had forced them apart, not their hearts. Before leaving, Kelly gave Chuck his old car, the same one filled with their memories together. As he sat behind the wheel, ready to drive away, Kelly called out his name and ran after him, embracing him tightly. Her tears and trembling voice revealed the truth: she still didn't want to let him go. For a fleeting moment, Chuck almost gave in. He even let her sit in the car beside him. But soon, he stopped. He looked at her with tired yet determined eyes and said softly, "Go back. Stay with your family. I can't let my return destroy what you've built." Kelly broke down but understood. She respected his decision, kissed him goodbye one last time, and returned home. Chuck, heartbroken yet resolute, went to see an old friend. There, he recounted his harrowing experiences on the island. His friend was astonished. Anyone else would have died. "How did you survive all those years?" Chuck explained everything: how he hunted with makeshift tools, how he learned to use the island's resources, and how every day was a battle against despair. But then his voice grew heavier. He admitted there were times he wanted to end it all, to give up on life. "The only thing that kept me alive," Chuck confessed, "was the thought of Kelly. I believed she was waiting for me. If I died, she'd be alone in this world." That hope was his anchor, his only motivation. He survived storms, starvation, and loneliness only because of his love for her. He had promised himself that if he ever returned, he would leave everything else, his work, his burdens, just to be with her. But fate was cruel. When he finally came back, Kelly had moved on. She had a husband, a family, and happiness of her own. Chuck could have torn it all apart to reclaim her, but he wasn't that kind of man. He wanted love, yes, but not at the cost of destroying someone else's life. Now, with Kelly gone, Chuck felt a crushing emptiness. She had been his reason to fight, his purpose to live. Without her, the silence felt even heavier than the island. Yet, as he sat quietly, memories of the island flooded back: his struggles, his fire, Wilson, the endless waves. They weren't just reminders of pain, they were proof that he had endured. And in those memories, Chuck found a strange comfort. Life had taken everything from him, but it had also given him something priceless: the strength to survive, and perhaps, one day, to start again. Chuck had even started talking to the ball he named Wilson, just to keep his mind from breaking under the crushing silence. Maybe his brain had invented that bond on purpose, a survival trick to give him company in the middle of nowhere. The depth of his attachment became painfully clear when, adrift in the vast ocean, Wilson was swept away. Chuck panicked, chasing after it with everything he had, but failed. The grief that consumed him was real, as if he had lost a true friend. Even when recounting it later, he admitted to his friend how much that moment broke him. Through all of it, one thing never changed: his love for Kelly. He never stopped loving her. But Chuck realized he couldn't spend the rest of his life clinging to the past. Kelly had moved on, and so must he. It was time to rebuild. With that resolve, Chuck decided to return to his old company, where he had once worked as a manager. His skill and dedication were undeniable. No company would ever reject him. But one question lingered in his mind: if FedEx had known their plane had gone down, why hadn't they launched a rescue mission? The truth, he learned, was sobering. Rescue planes and ships had been dispatched, but the island where Chuck had washed ashore was so remote, so hidden, it didn't even exist on any maps. No one could have found him there. The fact that he ever escaped was nothing short of a miracle. That mysterious island could have been his eternal prison, but Chuck never stopped trying, and that perseverance is what saved his life. Time moved forward, and soon we see Chuck driving down an open road. In the seat beside him lay the few belongings he had salvaged from his ordeal: tools, remnants, and one unopened FedEx package. Unlike the others he had ripped apart in desperation, this one he had always kept sealed. It had stayed with him on the island through his darkest nights, a strange symbol of unfinished purpose. Now, years later, Chuck had decided to deliver it to its rightful owner. The package bore a design of angel wings across its surface. A symbol. A promise. Maybe even destiny. Chuck didn't know yet what it meant, but he could feel something stirring. His life wasn't over. It had changed forever, yes, but it was moving again. He drove straight to the address written on the box. When he arrived, the house was empty. He knocked, called out, but no one answered. So he quietly placed the package at the doorstep, fulfilling the duty he had held on to for so long. Chuck kept thinking how much he wished he could meet the owner of that package, just to tell them the truth, that their parcel had saved his life. To express that, he left a letter along with it, writing his name and a simple but powerful message: "Your package kept me alive." Since no one was home, Chuck felt a little disappointed, but he left anyway with a quiet sense of peace. His duty was fulfilled. He had returned from the edge of death, and even if his life was still uncertain, his work, his purpose, would always continue. Driving away, Chuck discovered that his car had broken down in the middle of nowhere. Confused and unable to figure out which direction to take, he stood by the road with his map, but nothing made sense. Just then, another truck pulled up. Inside was a woman. Seeing Chuck's confusion, she immediately stopped to help, giving him clear directions to reach the main highway back to the city. Grateful, Chuck thanked her as her dog barked from the passenger seat. But then, something caught his eye: the design painted on the woman's truck. Wings. The same wings that had been drawn on the very package he had just delivered. At that moment, the connection became clear. The parcel he had guarded for so long, the one he had carried through years of isolation, belonged to her. And another truth revealed itself. In the film's opening, we had seen a FedEx van delivering to her home. Back then, she had a husband, and the farm was under both their names. But now, when Chuck returned, the husband's name was gone. For reasons unknown, she was living alone. Two people. Two lives. Both marked by loss, both stranded in different ways, and both brought together by a single package. Chuck stood at a crossroads, literally and figuratively. One road led back to the city, to the life he thought he was returning to. The other led toward the woman's farm. He paused, thought for a long while, then smiled faintly as he looked toward her road. For the first time in years, Chuck knew where destiny was guiding him. And so, his story closed, not with despair, but with the possibility of a new beginning.